girls. Thank you for joining us today for our reading elective. My name is Abby, and I'm coming to you live from Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Wow, I really like how it's the word Virginia twice. That's nice.
I mean, what can I say? It's where I live.
What's up, everyone? I'm Casey, and I'm coming at you from Ohio. Just kidding. Cincinnati, Ohio.
You cracking me up. Hey, and I'm Stacy, live from Michigan.
And it's nice to see you again. I'm Chizzy, and I am here in Arizona where it is hot. And this is our 5th week, right? This is our 5th episode of our reading of Gladys Aylward. So we are reading through this awesome missionary's life week by week and finding out different things that God is doing in her life. So, okay, let me just run through. Let's see. And I want to ask you guys, Cast, what do you feel about what happened last week? She found Mrs. Lawson, starts working with Mrs. Lawson. The villagers are really freaked out. I mean, understandably, they haven't seen anyone that looks like these two women, especially not Mrs. Lawson, but definitely this new younger woman. They are freaked out by them and are not very welcoming. And then Gladys suddenly comes up with this, well, she didn't realize it was an idea, gave Mrs. Lawson the idea to start an inn. And so now they're starting an inn, and Gladys's job is the mules, right? So she drags mules in because she has to get them to come to the inn because no one wants to come to the inn because they think it's haunted. And so she has to physically grab mules and bring them in to bring all the people on the mule train into the inn. So what do you guys think about that so far?
Very, very good. I am on the edge of my seat every single time. I don't know how Gladys, she never fails me when it comes to adventure, so.
No.
Crazy life.
I agree with that. It's a lot to handle. And I think it's definitely like a roller coaster. Like 1 minute you're like, yes, Gladys. And then you're like, Gladys, what? Come on. And it's just, that's part of a good book, I guess, though. But it was her life, so it's crazy to think. I mean, obviously there's added flavor, but.
Ooh, I'm impressed because I feel like if it was me, I would have been maybe I would have already run away by now. The fact that she's so steadfast in like staying and carrying out the mission, I'm just like, whoa. Thank you, Jesus.
I think also that she's steadfast while being scared. Like sometimes I think that steadfast people are like, you know what, we're just going to do this anyway. But she's always like, what now?
Yeah. Like they can disconnect a little bit, but she's like fully present and fully courageous.
Yes. Yeah.
What a woman. Okay, so I can't wait to find out what happens with Gladys today, and I'm sure you girls are also incredibly excited. But before we get into that good stuff, I want to remind you that each week we are taking pictures of your beautiful faces doing these beautiful activities, and you could possibly be featured on our True Girl Live just like this cutie, Lori. Oh, she's so cute with her art. We love you, Lori. So the way you can do this is have your mom or your dad or your dog, probably not your dog, take a picture of you and put it on social media and be sure to tag us. And then when you tag us, we'll see the picture and we can put it up. They're so cute, guys. We love seeing them. Even if we don't put them on the show, we love seeing what you guys are doing. It's incredible. Also, we are not going to be doing freedom stories today. We have a special treat in its place. But for now, if you could drop your prayer requests in the chat, we would love to pray for you. So go for it.
For sure. So just like Casey said, Freedom Stories is going to look a little different today because this week we're celebrating a new release of an audiobook at True Girl. The book Lies Girls Believe in the Truth That Sets Them Free and the Mom's Guide for that book are now available. And we have a special guest to tell us why she is so thankful that we have this audiobook. So hop on, Sarah, you there?
Yes, I am. Hi.
Hey, we're so happy you're here. Thanks for being with us.
I'm happy to be here.
Sarah is super cool. You go to Grace Prep, right? Which is the school that was founded by Bob and Dana Gresh. So Sarah, you've kind of been writing into the ministry and asking about this product. So tell us why the audiobook means so much to you.
Audiobooks are really important to me because reading doesn't come naturally to me because I have dyslexia. To be honest, I've actually only read one of Dana's books, which is Lies Young Women Believe, because it's the only one in audio format. My mother has read The Bride Wore White, The Secret Keeper, The Delicate Power of Modesty to me. But it wasn't never quite the same because I always wanted to read with a group of my friends or by myself. I always needed somebody to read to me, but now a young girl can read this type of book on her own and then discuss it with her mom or her friends afterwards. This is such a great opportunity for girls to actually read by themselves and, you know, have that kind of independence. So I'm super excited for Christian audiobooks to be out.
Got you. So we like do these freedom stories, and the girls tell us about the fears that they have, the anxieties, the sadness, and how God is kind of speaking into that and giving them verses to help them overcome those emotions. So you've definitely probably had some bad feelings because you learn a bit differently. What has God kind of like taught you through that? Has he given you any verses or anything for that?
Yes, actually he has. And I think one of the biggest verses that has really shaped my life is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And I know that verse can be misused a lot, but honestly, we all need God's strength anyways. And there's nothing that I could ever do that was without God's strength when I was in those bad feelings.
Got you. Absolutely. What advice do you have for girls with dyslexia or any other learning differences?
I actually have a lot of advice because there's so much I could give. I think the first thing is accept that you learn it differently, because your learning challenge is always going to be with you. Don't let, it's always going to be with you. Another one is learn that you're just going to have to work harder than everyone else. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, there are definitely people who procrastinate and then they don't get their work done. But you can also take breaks. It's honestly really good to work hard. Another one is believe that your learning difference doesn't make you stupid. You are so smart. Just because you learn in a different way, that doesn't mean you're stupid. You just literally learn in a different way. Recognize that you also have strengths. It's not just all weaknesses. So some of my strengths, as an example, is I might not be great at reading books, but I can read people really good. And you're outgoing and enjoy acting and sewing, and I dabble in a little bit of graphic design.
That's really, really cool. So girls, we just want to remind you, freedom stories are so important. I'm so glad that you came on and shared that with us. It's nice to kind of switch it up. We kind of always read them, but to be able to see your face and have you share that truth that God has given you to help you with this is awesome. So thank you so much for being here with us, Sarah. And we'll see you soon, hopefully.
See ya. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you. And guys, we want to remind you, go ahead and get that audiobook today. Even if you just like audiobooks, you don't have to have a learning difference or anything like that. But if you just like audiobooks, you find that you read books easier that way, make sure you get it. We'll put the link to this book and to the Mom's Guide in our comments on Facebook. So make sure you check that out there. And we also want to continue to hear your freedom stories. So first thing you got to do, start reading that Bible every day. Second thing, identify the verses that help you feel hopeful and peaceful and joyful and just help you truly believe that God is in control of your life, of your story, and everything that's happening. And then the third thing, we want you to send in your freedom story to mytruegirl.com/live. Okay? Cool beans. Throwing it to you, Chizzy.
All right. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Sarah. It was awesome to hear that. I love hearing people talk about the practical ways the Lord is using things in their lives. So, okay, today it's time for us to get into the next section of what is going on in Gladys Aylward's life. Okay, so I already gave at the beginning of the show a little rundown on what happened last week. And here we'll be starting with the part where Gladys was working. She had like a really busy day and she's in the middle of writing a letter to her family back home when Mrs. Lawson pops in and asks her if they can go on their usual walk. So I'll be overlapping by a few sentences from last time's reading. Now, I am massively anti-spoiler, but I will say that since we have a wide range of people listening to the show, listening to the reading, you need to know that there is a little bit of sadness coming up in today's reading. So I just want to give you a heads up. I will read it as clearly as I can, but just to warn you, if you have the book and you're following along, I may be glossing over a couple parts here and there. So I'll just make sure not to take any big chunks out of the actual story. All right. Okay, so here's the overlap, and then I will continue and see if we can get through all of chapter 8 and hopefully into some of chapter 9 today. Okay, last week I was asked if I could pause so people can go to the bathroom. I didn't because a whole bunches of people are listening. So if you've got to go potty, either turn this up and and go, or just go really fast, because I'm only reading a few sentences from last week. So now's your chance. Otherwise, you got to hold it. Okay, here we go. So she had also spent that day longer than intended writing a letter to her parents in London. As a result, Gladys had decided to not go on their usual walk that night. Very politely, she told Mrs. Lawson she couldn't take a walk with her because she needed to spend more time concentrating on language study. Mrs. Lawson was gruff, and she could get into a bad temper and say things she didn't mean, but Gladys had never seen her in such a temper as the one she worked herself into over Gladys's not taking a walk with her. Mrs. Lawson told Gladys that if she didn't want to go for a walk with her, then she might as well pack up her bags and leave. When Gladys didn't say anything, Mrs. Lawson got even angrier. She started throwing Gladys's belongings out into the courtyard. An audience quickly gathered at the gate to see what all the commotion was about, and Gladys fled into the kitchen and hid behind a table with Yang. Both of them were shocked by Mrs. Lawson's behavior. Yang spoke first. "She is old," he said in a soothing voice. "She needs some time to calm down. Why don't you take a little trip to Zhejiang and visit the nice lady there? Mrs. Lawson will call for you in a few days when she gets over this." Gladys closed her eyes and tried to think. By now, Mrs. Lawson had finished yelling and slamming the new doors. Finally, there was silence in the house again. "But I can't walk the trail to Zhejiang. It takes 2 days," said Gladys. "You will not have to walk. I will arrange for you to go with a mule train," replied Yang. The journey back through Chaozun to Zhejiang was a sad one for Gladys. Only 10 months before, she had set off to find Mrs. Lawson with the highest of hopes, and now she was returning an outcast. Perhaps the director at the China Inland Mission Training School in London had been right, after all. Perhaps she really didn't have what it took to be a missionary, thought Gladys. Gladys had no way of letting Mrs. Smith know she was coming to stay. The mule train was the fastest way to get a message from one place to another, and Gladys was on the first mule train out of Yangcheng following Mrs. Lawson's explosive outburst. Gladys didn't know how she would explain the situation to Mrs. Smith when she got to Zhejiang. As it turned out, she didn't need to. Mrs. Smith understood perfectly. "Oh, we all know Mrs. Lawson," she said to Gladys when they met. "Her heart is in the right place, but her temper does get in the way sometimes. Over the next few days, she'll think about what she said to you and be sorry. I'm sure a messenger will be at the door in a week or so with a note asking you to come back. She can't do without you, you know." Mrs. Smith held Gladys's hand as she spoke. Gladys smiled. Hearing what Mrs. Smith had to say made her feel much better. "You just rest here with us, and you'll hear from Mrs. Lawson in no time," reassured Mrs. Smith, patting the back of Gladys's hand. 6 days later, a messenger came to the door, just as Mrs. Smith had predicted, but he didn't come to deliver the message they'd expected. The messenger talked to Mrs. Smith in the Zhejiang dialect. Gladys couldn't understand much of what they said, so she waited for the conversation to end. Finally, after a lot of questions, Mrs. Smith thanked the messenger, bowed to him, and closed the door. With the color draining from her face, she turned to Gladys. "What is it?" asked Gladys. "I'm not sure," said Mrs. Smith, frowning. "It's a bit hard to work out, really. The messenger was from the Mandarin of Zhejiang." Gladys gasped. She knew that a Mandarin, a Chinese official, didn't trouble himself with small matters. "It seems Mrs. Lawson has been in some kind of accident," said Mrs. Smith. "Is she all right?" Gladys interrupted, her heart pounding. Well, it's a bit hard to say. The Mandarin heard the story after it had been sent through several mule trains. He didn't know where Mrs. Lawson was, but he said she was dying. Mrs. Smith's voice trailed off. Dying? Repeated Gladys. Yes, but that could mean anything. She may only have a scratch or two. You know how rumors are, said Mrs. Smith, trying to sound reassuring. Gladys nodded. Her thoughts were whirling. There was only one thing to do. I must find her quickly. She needs me, Gladys told Mrs. Smith. I'll leave at once. Poor Yang, he has so much to do already. I need to help him with Mrs. Lawson. Mrs. Smith helped Gladys gather supplies for the return journey, and together they found a mule train that would take her back to Yangcheng. Once again, Gladys was hoisted onto a mule litter and found herself swaying and bobbing her way back up into the mountains. Every time they passed a mule train along the way, she would call out and ask if they had any news of the old white devil. No one had any news. That night, as they entered the village of Chaozun, Gladys had better luck. An old muleteer who had stayed at the Inn of Eight Happinesses the night before told her that Mrs. Lawson was not in Yangcheng. Yang had told him she'd taken a trip farther up into the mountains. No one knew for sure where she was headed. Yang, apparently, had heard nothing about any accident. Gladys could feel her stomach churn. Mrs. Lawson wasn't with gentle old Yang after all. She was in the hands of strangers in some mountain village. That is, if she was still alive. Gladys had to find her, and fast. It took 4 more days of questions before Gladys found the small walled village of Chin Shui, where she found Mrs. Lawson. The situation was worse than anything Gladys could have imagined. Gladys found Mrs. Lawson, battered and bruised, lying in an open courtyard on a pile of coal. At first, Gladys thought Mrs. Lawson was dead, but as she rushed to her, Mrs. Lawson opened her eyes and smiled. Gladys, is that you, Gladys? I'm so glad you're here, she said. Gladys sat down on the heap of coal beside Mrs. Lawson and lifted her friend's head onto her lap. Mrs. Lawson winced in pain. Gladys called for hot water and a cloth and began sponging the black dust and some dried blood from Mrs. Lawson's face. As she cleansed Mrs. Lawson, Gladys became more and more angry. She looked up, and above Mrs. Lawson was a balcony with a broken railing. Suddenly, Gladys knew what had happened. Mrs. Lawson had fallen from the balcony, and she'd been lying out in the cold on this pile of coal for over a week. No one had tried to move her inside or dress her wounds. Gladys knew that it was only because Mrs. Lawson was such a stubborn old thing that she was still alive. Gladys took charge. A curious crowd of onlookers had gathered to see what was happening. In her best Yangcheng Chinese, she began to bark out orders. You 6, over here. We need to lift this woman. Bring your lanterns over here. Get me some strips of cloth. Tell the innkeeper we need a private room with a warm can, and we need it right away. Just as Gladys had hoped, the unusual experience of being told what to do by a foreign devil spurred them into action. Within an hour, Mrs. Lawson was cleaned up with her wounds dressed. As far as Gladys could tell, the wounds were not life-threatening. Mrs. Lawson seemed to have broken most of the bones in both of her hands, and she had cuts and bruises all over, but nothing else seemed to be wrong. As she lay on a padded bedroll on a can, Mrs. Lawson looked up at Gladys with grateful eyes. Oh, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you came, she repeated over and over. So am I, replied Gladys truthfully. She shuddered as she thought about what might have happened if she'd been just a day later. When Mrs. Lawson slept, Gladys crept from the room to ask some very important questions. She found the innkeeper and fired away. Why did you leave Mrs. Lawson on the coal pile for over a week? She asked. The innkeeper replied, Everyone was sure the old white devil was going to die at any minute. We asked ourselves, why cause her pain by moving her? Then why didn't you clean her wounds? Asked Gladys, continuing her questions. The innkeeper looked a little sheepish. She is a white devil. No one wanted to touch her. And she never asked for food, so we did not feed her, he added. Guessing Gladys's next question, Gladys shook her head. Sometimes she wondered whether she would ever understand the villagers' reasoning. How could they let a semi-conscious woman starve to death in the cold because she didn't ask for food? Frustrated, Gladys gave up on questioning the innkeeper and went back to see how Mrs. Lawson was doing. By the next morning, Gladys had decided on a plan of action. She would stay at the inn with Mrs. Lawson until she was strong enough to go back to Yangcheng. The nearest European doctor was in Luan, 6 days away by mule train, and there was no way Mrs. Lawson could make such a journey in her present condition. For 6 weeks, Gladys stayed at the inn in Chinshui, nursing Mrs. Lawson. At first, she'd had great hope for Mrs. Lawson's recovery. Her wounds began to heal and her hands were getting stronger. But something was not right. As the rest of her body got stronger, Mrs. Lawson's back got sorer and her mind became more confused. Things weren't going as Gladys had hoped, and she wasn't sure what to do about it. Finally, she decided that Mrs. Lawson needed to see the doctor, no matter how torturous the journey to get to him might be. With the help of the cook at the inn, Gladys found a muleteer who was prepared to take her and Mrs. Lawson to Luan. To make the trip as comfortable as possible, Gladys slung a blanket between 2 mules and had Mrs. Lawson lifted carefully into it. Mrs. Lawson lay between the 2 mules for 6 long days. When they got to the hospital, Gladys wondered whether it had been worth the effort and discomfort after all. The English doctor examined Mrs. Lawson and told Gladys she was slowly dying, and there was nothing that he or anyone else could do about it. The next day, Mrs. Lawson begged Gladys to take her home, so Gladys arranged one last journey for the 74-year-old missionary. The 2 women returned to Yangcheng, where Yang was waiting for them. When he saw Mrs. Lawson's condition, Yang made a special batch of her favorite soup and ordered her coffin. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Lawson was buried in the coffin as Gladys and Yang wept. Mrs. Lawson's funeral was the first Christian burial ever held in Yangcheng. After the funeral, as Gladys sat beside the grave of the woman she'd come halfway around the world to serve, fear crept into her heart. Mrs. Lawson's death had changed everything. Gladys was now the only European in the district. The closest person she could speak to in English was 2 days away by mule train. Gladys felt more alone than she'd ever felt before, more alone than when she was in the Siberian wilderness, walking along the railroad tracks back to Chita. She was deep in the heart of China with no money, no friends, and no missionary organization to back her. Still, alone as she was, Gladys told herself she had to go on. All around Yangcheng, people needed to hear the gospel message, and she was the only one left to share that message with them. Chapter 9, The Honorable Foot Inspector. No one knew why Mrs. Lawson had gone to Chinshui. Perhaps she was looking for a new location to start another inn. Perhaps she needed to get away and think about things after she'd lost her temper and thrown Gladys out. Whatever the reason, Mrs. Lawson never told anybody why she was leaving Yangcheng or where she was going. Gladys soon discovered something else Mrs. Lawson hadn't told her: how much it cost to run the inn. It was true that the Inn of 8 Happinesses made enough money to cover the cost of rent, coal for the kang, and food, but each year a large amount was paid in taxes to the mandarin. Mrs. Lawson had paid this amount from her small monthly income and had said nothing about it to Gladys or Yang. But with Mrs. Lawson gone, there was no extra income to pay the taxes, which were now due. Gladys had no idea where the money to pay these taxes would come from. She discussed the problem with Yang, who offered only one solution. She must go and bow before the mandarin. What difference would that make? Gladys asked impatiently. I don't see any point to it. You don't need to have a point. It is just something you should do. You will see the point when you get there, replied the old cook. How do I do it then? What do I say? Gladys asked. Yang frowned. That's a difficult question. I will ask in town. And with that, he headed out the door. Yang was back about an hour later, but he didn't have good news to report. Since Mrs. Lawson and Gladys were the first two foreigners to live in Yangcheng, there were no set rules for how many times Gladys should bow to the Mandarin, or exactly what she should say to him, or in what order. This posed a difficult problem because, as Yang pointed out, making a mistake in protocol when addressing the Mandarin could be deadly. In the end, Yang decided that Gladys should put on her best clothes and ask the Mandarin's secretary whether he would grant her an appointment to see the Mandarin. If he agreed, they would then work out the details of what she should say at the meeting. Gladys just shook her head. She had no best clothes. The only clothes she had were the quilted blue trousers and jacket she was wearing, and they weren't suitable clothes to bow before a Mandarin in. The Mandarin was the highest official in the district. It would be completely disrespectful to have an audience with him in such clothes, and Gladys didn't have the money to buy any other clothes. The case was closed. Gladys would not be seeing the Mandarin anytime soon. She would just have to find some other way to deal with paying taxes. About a week later, Gladys was upstairs writing a letter to some friends in England when she heard a commotion downstairs. She could hear unfamiliar sounds, like the clanging of bells and the rhythmic thump of marching feet. She hurried downstairs to see what it was. Yang met her in the doorway. "The Mandarin is coming! The Mandarin is coming!" he blurted out. Gladys was excited. The Mandarin rarely came out of his palace, or yamen, as it was called. If she hurried, she could see him passing by the Inn of Eight Happinesses. "Oh, where's the best place to see him pass?" she asked Yang. Yang stared at her. Then a look of understanding crossed his face. "Oh, no. He is not passing by. He is coming here to the Inn of Eight Happinesses. He wants to talk to you." Gladys's eyes grew wider and wider. "But why me?" she asked. "I don't know," Yang replied. "You should have gone and bowed to him when I told you to. Now, maybe he is angry." Yang backed his way out the door, and before Gladys could ask another question, he had turned and fled down the street in the opposite direction from the Mandarin. As she watched him disappear around the corner, Gladys thought he ran surprisingly fast for an old man. And that is where we will stop today. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry to do that to you guys. There's never a good spot to stop without leaving it hanging when we're reading Gladys Aylward, the missionary to China. Okay, that was a lot of things happened. Some sad, some a little funny in there, but yeah, that was a lot of things. I was not expecting, I mean, if I were Gladys Aylward, I was not expecting to be alone so soon after my long, hard journey to get to a specific person to help that person. Like, I don't know. I try to imagine, like, I hope you guys are doing this, but I put myself in that place and just think how, when it says that no one who spoke English was closer than 2 days away, I'm just trying to imagine that. Like, you can't have a conversation with anyone around you without using a language you're trying as hard as you can to learn and you don't know very well. And suddenly, that's it. You're the only one there. So anyway, I was thinking and just trying to think about how the Lord can use this part of Gladys Aylward's life to encourage me and encourage you guys. And I did have a verse that popped into my head, so I'll see if it works here. But I was thinking that those are the times where the instances that she'd gone through, the situations she'd already gone through, learning to rely on the Lord when everything in front of her is kind of foggy, like she can't see what's coming next. This is when that practice has been good. She would not, I think if I were her, I would assume that the hardest part was behind me, you know, like the journey was the toughest thing. And now that she's here, it's a lot easier. But that, of course, is not true. So I know that she would be pulling from her ability to trust the Lord. But okay, I will do the verse. The verse is Proverbs Proverbs chapter 27, verse 10. I don't understand this verse completely, but I know this is what it says. Do not forsake your friend and your father's friend, and do not go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Calamity means when really rough stuff is happening, disasters. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother who is far away. And so that verse popped into my head when I was thinking about Gladys Aylward during this part of her life, because I thought, I feel like you'd want to just pack up your things, like, you know what? I have put in a good run. I've been here for a long time. The lady I came to help has now passed on to be with Jesus. I don't speak this language. I don't have any money. This would be a great time to just be like, Jesus, I would like a miracle for you to send me back to London. And she hasn't done that. She stayed here and decided to help Mrs. Lawson. She didn't run away. So I was thinking like, okay, even though there was calamity, disaster, bad things, instead of running back to her family, she decided to stay and help this new neighbor, to stay here. And now we can see that even when that person she was helping has gone to be with Jesus, she's decided the people of Yangcheng still need to hear the gospel. And so she is going to stay with these new neighbors, even though they don't understand her. And so anyway, it just made me think about this time we're in right now during the quarantine. Some of you are maybe with people that you didn't mean to be with. Some of you are with your family. Some of you have sad things that have happened during this time. And so it might feel like you want to run away and you can't. And I just wanted to encourage you and all of us that when we're in those situations, just to keep trusting in the Lord and asking him, what is the next thing to do so that he can help us be brave during times where we can't see what's going on. So anyway, that's it for the reading today, and hopefully we'll definitely hear more next week from Gladys Aylward.
Thank you so much for that, Chizzy. That was great. Yes, I can't wait. The girls are so sad right now. They're just like, why did you stop reading?
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's understandable. But we're going to jump right into our prayer time. And we say this every day, but you girls listed a lot of prayer requests. And we're only going to pray for 4 or 5 right now, just for time's sake. But we see your prayer requests. God hears your prayer requests. And we'll be praying for them, even if we don't pray for them out loud right now. So we see a lot of prayer requests for grandparents who have COVID or are scared of getting COVID, and we'll absolutely be praying for them. Talia says, can you please pray for my mom who's having surgery after all of this is over? Morgan says, please pray for my aunt's new baby named Evelyn because they live in a hot spot for COVID-19. Bethany says, please pray for my mom. She is busy with work and is so stressed out. Please pray to release some of that stress. Bethany, I can absolutely relate to you. My mom is a worrier and she's been super busy with work right now. So I'll be praying for your mom and my mom and all moms. And prayer for nurses and essential workers. Girls, I just love that whenever you comment to pray for the nurses, that's just so sweet. And it's very true. Even if you don't have family members, it's still important to be praying for people who don't really have a choice but to be out in all of this craziness. All right, so if all of you want to bow your heads and pray with me. Father God, I thank you for who you are, and I thank you for the opportunity for each and every one of us to be here together, to fellowship with one another, even if we're not in the same states, the same countries, the same rooms. Father, we're together through you, and I praise you for that opportunity. I want to lift up all of these young ladies who are scared of COVID-19. I think there's just such a spirit of fear in this area right now. And I just ask that you would take away their fear and take away their anxiety over all of this, and they'd be able to look to you for strength and comfort. I pray for Talia, whose mom will have surgery soon. God, I pray that that would be a speedy recovery process, and that there would be no complications, and that it would happen soon, Father. I pray for Morgan's cousin named Evelyn and her family as they live in an area where the coronavirus is really centralized. I just ask that you would keep them safe, that you would keep them protected, and just keep that baby safe. I pray for Bethany and her mom. God, I thank you for Bethany's heart. And I just ask that you would lift her mom up and remind her that you're in control, and that you have the wisdom, that you have the foresight, that you know what's going on and you know what's going to happen. And God, I just pray for her work life, that you would relieve some of that pressure, that she would realize that it's not all on her shoulders, and that she would just cast those burdens on you for strength for herself. And God, I just pray for nurses and essential workers all over the world, that you would be close to them, that you would keep them safe, and that you would reward them for all their hard work that they're doing, that you would put people in their lives that would just throw blessings on them and keep praying for them and keep blessing them in ways that maybe aren't exactly expected, but so appreciated. I praise you for all the work that you're doing in each and every one of our lives. I thank you for each and every one of the girls that are watching. Thank you for their diligence and just their motivation to do stuff that isn't really about them, that they're able to look outside of themselves and learn. And I just praise you for that. Thank you for Chizzy for bringing her here and giving her great reading abilities. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Abby. All right, girls. So I have something very exciting to say. We are having a party tomorrow night, and I just want to know, are you gonna be there? You guys? Yeah, are you? Cheese?
Yeah.
No, I'll be there.
We're all gonna be there. We're gonna be playing super fun games, meeting super cool people, doing super crazy hair, and wow, I'm just so excited. Guys, seriously, it's gonna be great. We have special guests and worship. Oh, it's just gonna be so fun. And story time, literally, like, your mind's gonna be blown by the amount of fun stuff we're gonna be doing. And we're also gonna be coming together and praying with each other. Girls all over the world are going to be at the world's largest crazy hair party tomorrow night at 7. Is it 7 o'clock? It's 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. All right, girls. So make sure you register for this party. Now, something I just want to remind you of, we are doing like a donation. So if we understand, like, if you're financially in need right now and you can't really afford to pay to come to this crazy hair party, we still want you there. You don't have to pay anything. But if you do give, we will take your donation and take 50% of it, and we're going to be blessing 6 families that evening from Brooklyn, New York, who are really struggling. So it's just going to be really awesome, really fun. Tell your mamas, we're so excited. We want to see you there.
Yes, and then tonight we want to remind you guys, so you can tell your brothers and your dads, that our Born to Be Brave ministry, our brother ministry, is going live at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for some fun, okay? Now, I think, moms, you're going to like this, because I think they're like giving out ideas on Mother's Day breakfast ideas, like breakfast in bed and all of that. So moms, make sure your husband is there with your son so that you can have some good chow in a few weeks. All right. That is going to be really fun. Make sure you do that. And then we want to remind you girls that our last day of going live for the True Girl electives every single day is going to be on May 8th. So the rest of this week and all of next week, we'll see you right here on YouTube every day. But since things are easing up a bit and we'll be allowed to go out soon, we're going to switch it up and start doing one really great, extra special, worth tuning into True Girl Live event each week. But we'll have more details on that soon.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you had so much fun and that you just loved listening to Chizzy, and you probably got sleepy, or you were really, really, really just enthralled in the story. I just hope that you guys enjoyed it either way. And hopefully you join us tomorrow at noon. We have a special guest. Her name is Kenzie Simpson, and she's a hairstylist. She's going to be showing us 3 super funky hairstyles to prepare you for our crazy hair party. Those are some supplies that you'll need: a hairbrush, hair ties, bobby pins, comb, hair clips, and of course your creativity. Who's there? Who's gonna, do we have Chizzy do it?
What?
Yes.
Casey hasn't done it yet. Casey, have you done it?
I did it Tuesday.
You did? Okay, then it's my turn, I guess. Here we go. Ladies. Hey, hey, hey. See you Friday.
See ya.
Bye, girls.
All the crazy talk I hear on the TV. They wanna tell me what to believe, who I should be. I don't wanna jump in blind just to be seen. I wanna spend my life with my eyes on eternity. 'Cause I know who I am, got joy down in my heart. I know God's got a plan, He's known me from the start. I am a true girl, Jesus is my foundation. Tell the whole world I am a new creation. I am free, I am a masterpiece, and I am fearfully and wonderfully me. I am a true girl. I am a true girl. Won't believe the lie that beauty's on the outside. When the world's against me, I wanna shine bright. The love of Jesus will show in my life. The truth has set me free, and your light will always shine. 'Cause I know who I am, got joy down in my heart. I know God's got a plan, He's known me from the start. I am a true girl, Jesus is my foundation. Tell the whole world I am a new creation. I am free, I am a masterpiece, and I am fearfully and wonderfully me. I am a true girl. 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 Jesus is my